My name is Celeste Harmon. I'm 31 years old. And the morning my aunt texted me a Zillow link with a laughing emoji was the morning I understood that being reliable for long enough can become so ordinary to the people around you that they forget to account for you at all. The listing had gone live at 9 in the morning. By the time my aunt's text reached me, I was 40 minutes into my shift at the county extension office where I worked as an agricultural program coordinator, and the thumbnail on the link was immediately recognizable. The front fence line of my grandfather's farm on Delwood Road, the old silo visible in the upper left corner of the frame, the oak at the edge of the east field that had been there since before my mother was born. Finally getting what it's worth, my aunt had written, followed by the emoji. I set my phone face down on my desk. I picked up the file I had been working on. I read the same sentence 4 times without absorbing it. My mother called at 11:47. She was in good spirits. She told me the listing had 3 offers already, that the realtor, a woman named Sandra Chu at Delwood Realty, had said it was priced exactly right for the current market, and that the plan was to review offers by end of week and go to closing within 30 days. She said she and my Aunt Roberta had agreed to split the proceeds. She said she hoped I understood that it was time, that holding the property wasn't practical, that my grandfather would have wanted them to be sensible about it. She asked if I had any questions. I said, "You should call your realtor back. There's a problem with the title." A pause. Then, "What do you mean, a problem?" I told her I would explain when I had more information and that she should call Sandra Chu before the end of the business day. I ended the call. I opened my desk drawer. I took out my personal files folder, the one I kept at the office because I had learned, over years of working in county records adjacent work, that keeping important documents somewhere accessible was not paranoia but practice. I found the copy of the warranty deed my grandfather had filed 9 years earlier, 2 months before he died, transferring title to the farm at 4418 Delwood Road from his name alone into mine. I had been 22 years old when he handed me the copy. I had been standing in his kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains his wife had sewn in 1987 and never replaced, and he had slid the paper across the table and said, in the direct way he said most things, "The farm is yours now. Don't let anyone tell you different." I had been paying the property taxes on it for 9 years. $1,143 annually, odd number because the county assessor had recalculated the agricultural exemption 3 years in. I had the receipts in the same folder as the deed. 9 years. 31 tax payments. Not one person in my family had asked who was sending in the checks. I need to explain the shape of my family before I explain what happened next, because the shape of a family is always the reason. My grandfather, Walter Harmon, had built the farm over 40 years on Delwood Road outside a small agricultural county in central Tennessee. 83 acres. Soybeans and a leased cattle operation for most of his working life, then soybeans alone when the cattle lease wasn't renewed. He had 2 daughters, my mother, Patrice, who had left the county for Nashville at 20 and come back at 35 when her marriage ended, and my Aunt Roberta, who had never left and had built her life for miles down the road in a house she shared with her husband Darren and, periodically, various adult children and grandchildren who needed somewhere to land. My grandfather had a specific and private sense of fairness that was not always legible to people who didn't know him well. He did not explain his decisions. He made them and then he moved on, and if someone wanted to argue with them they were welcome to, but he was not going to change them on the basis of an argument alone. He had watched both of his daughters from a careful distance for most of their adult lives, and he had arrived, somewhere in the last decade of his life, at a conclusion about them that he expressed only in the distribution of what he had. He left his personal property and savings, which came to approximately $67,000 after estate expenses, equally between my mother and Roberta. He left the farm to me, not to my mother, not to Roberta. To me, his granddaughter, who had spent every summer on that farm from age 4 to 18, who had learned to drive on the back field road, who had sat with him at the kitchen table every Sunday morning for the last 4 years of his life, while I was in college 40 minutes away, who had been the one who drove him to his cardiology appointments at Vanderbilt with Dr. Marcus Reyes when his own children were not available, which was frequently. I do not know exactly what my grandfather saw in my mother and Roberta that led him to his decision. I know what I observed, which was that neither of them had spent meaningful time at the farm in the decade before he died. Roberta came at Christmas. My mother came when there was something that needed doing that she could not delegate. The Sunday morning visits, the cardiology appointments, the afternoon he needed someone to sit with him when the diagnosis came back and he didn't want to be alone, those were mine. He did not explain himself. He filed the deed and handed me the copy and said what he said, and he died 7 weeks later on a Tuesday morning in March with the yellow curtains letting in the early light. My mother found out about the deed at the estate attorney's office, a woman named Gloria Tran at Tran and Associates in the county seat, who walked both daughters through the distribution with the careful, measured pace of someone who had done this many times and understood that the room was always difficult. Roberta's husband Darren stood up when Gloria finished and said something about a challenge, and Gloria had explained, in the same measured pace, that the deed transfer had been executed properly, notarized, filed with the county recorder's office, and was legally sound. She had a physician's attestation from Dr. Reyes regarding my grandfather's competence at the time of filing. My mother said very little in that room. She thanked Gloria. She stood up and gathered her things, and she and Roberta walked to the parking lot together, and I drove home alone. In the weeks that followed, what emerged, slowly, in the way things emerge when they are being managed rather than confronted directly, was not a formal legal challenge, but something more ambient. A set of references, recurring in family conversations, to what my grandfather had meant by the transfer, to what he would have wanted for the family as a whole, to the idea that certain decisions made by elderly men in the final months of their lives reflected the circumstances of those months rather than any enduring intention. My mother did not say these things directly to me. She said them to my cousin Lee, who told her husband, who mentioned it at a cookout in a way that made clear it was already an established position in that branch of the family. I did not respond to any of it. I paid the property taxes. I drove out to the farm periodically to check on the tenant farmer, a man named Roy Castillo, who had been leasing the tillable acreage for 6 years and who paid his lease fee into an account I had opened specifically for farm-related expenses. I mowed the area around the house twice a summer. I kept the gutters clear. I did not talk about the farm at family events. I did not reference the deed. I did not bring up the taxes. I showed up at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I helped with the dishes, and I drove home. For 9 years. What my mother and Roberta had apparently been discussing in the months before the Zillow listing, I learned in pieces. The core of it was this: they had decided, together, that enough time had passed. That the transfer had been a temporary arrangement, or a misunderstanding, or something that could be addressed through the practical reality of the situation. That if they listed the property and went to contract and moved the sale forward far enough, the path of least resistance for everyone involved, including me, would be to let it proceed. They had not consulted an attorney before listing. They had not run a title search. They had given Sandra Chu their names as the sellers, and Sandra Chu, who had no reason to look further, had taken the listing and put it on the market. The problem with a title search is that it always happens. It is not optional. It is a standard step in any real estate transaction, and it is conducted by the buyer's attorney or title company, not the seller's agent, which means the seller's choices about what to disclose do not determine what the search finds. The search finds what the county recorder's office has on file. What the county recorder's office had on file, in clear recorded language, was a warranty deed executed 9 years ago transferring ownership of 4418 Delwood Road to Celeste Marie Harmon. I called Gloria Tran that afternoon.
She remembered me.
She pulled the file while I was on the phone and confirmed what I already knew. The deed was valid, recorded, and had never been transferred out of my name. Any contract of sale executed without my signature as the owner of record was not a valid conveyance of title. She asked how I wanted to handle it. I told her I wanted to be careful. I said I didn't want to make a move that felt punitive or that closed off the possibility of a reasonable conversation. I said I wanted to understand what had been done and why, and whether there was a path forward that didn't require the kind of conflict that would be impossible to come back from. She said that was a considered position, and she advised me to take a few days before responding to anything and to let the title search do its work in the meantime. I said I thought that was right. I went home that evening. I made dinner. I sat at my kitchen table for a while with a glass of water, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with the particular quiet of a decision that hasn't been made yet. My mother called at 9:17. Her voice had a quality I recognized from my childhood, a careful steadiness that meant she was managing something she hadn't expected to need to manage. She said the realtor had called her. She said there was apparently a title issue. She said she thought we should talk. I said I agreed. I said I would like to talk in person and I would like Gloria Tran to be present and I would like to schedule it for the following week. My mother said that seemed formal. I said I thought formal was appropriate given the situation. She said she would call me tomorrow. I said goodnight and ended the call. She called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. Roberta called an hour later. I let that go too. Darren called from a number I didn't have saved, which I only knew because he left a voicemail in a tone that was making an effort to be reasonable. My cousin Lee texted twice. 14 calls total before noon. Not before sunrise as I had anticipated. The timeline compressed, but 14 by midday, which told me something about the urgency on their end that I did not need anyone to explain. I texted my mother at 12:30. I'll be in touch after I speak with Gloria. Please don't move forward with any paperwork in the meantime. She did not respond. Gloria called me that afternoon. She had heard from Sandra Chu, who had heard from the buyer's agent, who had heard from the buyer's attorney. The title search had returned the recorded deed in my name, and the buyer's attorney had advised their client to pause until the ownership question was resolved. The buyers, a couple from Nashville looking to expand an existing operation, were not walking away yet, but they were not proceeding without a clear title. Gloria said the listing was effectively frozen. I said I understood. She said the sellers, meaning my mother and Roberta, had asked her to reach out and find out what I wanted. I said I would tell them myself, in person, at a meeting with Gloria present, the following Thursday. The meeting was in Gloria Tran's conference room. My mother sat across from me, with Roberta beside her. Darren had come too, which I had not expected, and he sat at the end of the table with his arms crossed in the particular way of a man who has decided his presence is a form of leverage. Gloria sat at the head of the table with a legal pad. My mother opened by saying she wanted to understand my position. I said my position was the same as it had been for 9 years. I owned the farm. The deed said so. The county recorder's office said so. That had not changed. Roberta said my grandfather had been in declining health when the deed was transferred. I said Dr. Reyes had provided a competency attestation at the time of filing, and that Gloria had that document in her file, and that any challenge on those grounds would need to contend with it. I said this without particular emphasis, the way you state a fact about the weather. Darren said something about family and fairness. I said I agreed that fairness was important and that I'd like to talk about what fair actually looked like in this situation. I said, my grandfather had made a decision. He had made it legally, clearly with documentation, with a physician's letter, and he had communicated it to me directly. He had not made it carelessly or in a confused moment. He had made it because it was what he intended. I said I had spent 9 years honoring that decision by taking care of the property, paying the taxes, maintaining the tenant relationship, without asking for anything or making any claim on anyone else's resources. Roberta said, "You could have said something. In 9 years, you could have said something." I said, "You could have asked." The room was quiet. I said I wanted to tell them what I was willing to do. I said I was not interested in holding the farm purely as a point of principle. I said the property deserved to be used well, and I was not in a position to farm it myself, and the tenant lease was not a permanent solution. I said I was open to a sale. My mother's posture shifted. I said I was open to a sale on specific terms. I said the net proceeds would go to me, as the owner of record, and that I was willing to make a voluntary distribution from those proceeds to my mother and Roberta, not because I was required to, but because I thought it was the right thing to do, and because my grandfather had left them money from his estate, and I did not want to act as though that meant nothing. Darren said, "What kind of distribution?" I said 20% of the net proceeds, split equally between my mother and Roberta. Roberta said that was less than they would have received if the sale had proceeded. I said yes. I said that was because the sale they had attempted to proceed with had not been legal, and the correction of that situation had a cost, and I thought it was reasonable that cost be reflected in the outcome. My mother looked at the table. I said I was not trying to punish anyone. I said I was trying to find an arrangement that was honest and that we could all live with going forward. I said I was willing to hear a counterproposal, but that any counterproposal needed to start from the accurate legal position, which was that I owned the property. Gloria said, quietly, that she could draw up a distribution agreement if the parties wanted to proceed on that basis. My mother said she needed to think. I said, of course. I said I would need an answer within 2 weeks, because I intended to proceed with the sale with or without a distribution agreement, and if there was no agreement in place, then the proceeds would remain solely with me. We left the conference room separately. My mother called me 4 days later. She said she and Roberta had discussed it. She said they would accept the 20% split. She said she wanted me to know that she thought my grandfather had made a mistake. I said I understood that was how she felt. She said, "He always favored you." I said, "He trusted me." There's a difference. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said she'd have her attorney look at whatever Gloria drafted. I said that was sensible. I said I'd be in touch when the documents were ready. I ended the call and sat in my car in the parking lot of the extension office for a few minutes. The afternoon light was doing something particular to the field across the road, the way it does in late summer in Tennessee when the air is still and the soybeans are full. I had looked at that kind of light my whole life. My grandfather had taught me what it meant about the growing season. I started the car and drove back to work. The sale closed on a Wednesday in October. The buyers were the Nashville couple after all. They had waited out the title resolution and come back to the table with the same offer, which I respected. The farm went for $619,000. After commission, closing costs, and the distribution agreement, my mother and Roberta each received $54,290. My net was approximately $492,000, which I moved in portions, some into a farmland investment trust one had been researching for 2 years, some into a long-term savings account, a smaller portion set aside for a specific purpose I had been considering for some time. Roy Castillo, the tenant farmer, sent me a handwritten note when he heard the farm had sold. He said he was sorry to see it go, and that my grandfather had been a fair man and that he hoped the new owners would be good stewards. I kept the note. It is in the same folder as the deed. I still drive past Delwood Road sometimes, on the way to sites I visit for work. The new owners have put in a second fence line along the east field and replaced the fascia on the barn, which needed it. The oak at the edge of the east field is still there. I don't know why I expected it might not be, but I looked for it the first time I drove past, and it was, and I found that steadying in a way I didn't examine too closely. My relationship with my mother is what it is. We are in contact. We exchange information about practical things, health updates, holiday logistics, the ordinary maintenance of family connection. There is a layer beneath that which we do not visit, a layer that holds the full shape of what happened and what it meant, and I think we have both decided, without discussing it, that visiting that layer would cost more than either of us wants to spend. Roberta and I do not speak often. Darren I have not spoken to since the conference room. Lee texted me 6 months after the closing. She said she'd heard the farm sold and that she hoped I was doing okay. I said I was. She said she was glad. We have not spoken since, but the text was genuine, and I noted that. The thing about a legal document is that it does not negotiate. It does not soften its language because a room is uncomfortable. It does not wait to be acknowledged or adjust itself based on who in the family is willing to look at it. It says what it says, in the place where things are recorded, and it says it the same way on the day you file it, and the day 10 years later when a title search returns it to a buyer's attorney. My grandfather understood that. He had spent a lifetime in agricultural county records, watching farms pass through families in ways that did not always reflect what anyone had intended. He knew how property worked. He knew how families worked. He had taken one quiet Wednesday afternoon, while he still could, and he had put in writing exactly what he wanted. He had not done it to cause trouble. He had done it because he trusted me to handle it correctly when the moment came. The moment came. I handled it. That is the complete record of what happened, and the record is enough. There's something I've been thinking about since all of this settled. The people who knew what my grandfather had done, who sat in Gloria Tran's office 9 years ago and heard it clearly, still listed that farm. They made a calculation that the paperwork would either disappear or wouldn't matter. They were wrong about the paperwork. But I keep wondering, what did they think was going to happen? If you've ever been in a room where someone acted like a document didn't exist, a will, a deed, a contract, I'd like to know what happened when the document turned out to matter. Leave it in the comments. New stories every week. Subscribe if this one found you at the right time. This is an original fictional story created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All names, characters, events, and details are invented and do not represent real individuals or actual events.